I'm back with Blue Review, and going to do a couple of things a little bit differently to kind of make things a little more compact, concise, and save some time, and just kind of make things a little more streamlined. Hopefully, going forward, we'll see. It's all experimental still at this early stage, even though I've been doing this for a year and a half. But until I get like a real studio or real lighting, real microphone, that's kind of how I see it. So let me dive in. I'm going to review a few movies that I've been streaming. My streaming sources have primarily been Tubi and Shudder. I have access to. Callow is making a guest appearance, cleaning his fine body. I have access to Shudder via Shelley Druckreich, permanent channel patron and great friend Shelley. And I did my first Halloween stream on Werewolf by Night, which streamed on Disney Plus starting last Friday. I have access to Disney Plus via permanent channel patron and collaborator Tim Tolbert. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm still making fun of the King of Comedy scene. Basically, these are a few movies that mostly I have never seen before, but that fit kind of in the general umbrella of Halloween, of the October month, of horror, of mystery thrillers, violence, weirdness, strangeness, the supernatural, occult, sci-fi horror, and anything related just to plain old Halloween. So some of these will be genre hybrids, like science fiction horror. Did I say that already? And actually one of those I'm going to talk about shortly. A few movies I'm going to talk about that I've been streaming lately are ones I have seen before, but it has been a very long time for them, and I don't really recall them very crisply. And also, The Prince, now on Shudder and Tubi, may or may not be further remastered. That's been a little uneven, just depending on the film. But some really, really, really obscure films have been surfacing that I really want to talk about this year during this month. But I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on each one. So I'm going to enumerate the films in the description below, like, the title, the year, the director, and just the basic stuff. So I'm just going to basically go with everything else kind of off the cuff. Just talk about the meat of the movies, sometimes the dead meat of the movies. And in that note, the first one I'm going to talk about is Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, 1990, directed by Jeff Burr, written by David J. Schow, who, of course, was one of the leading lights alongside cats like Skip and Spectre of the splatterpunk horror movement beginning in the 80s. Of course, Clive Barker was a big influence on that as well, I think. Schow is also known, as far as the screenwriter, I think he's best known in circles I'm familiar with as being the scriptwriter for The Crow, which is kind of one of those movies that was a surprise hit, a crossover hit, a comic book adaptation, not exactly a superhero, but kind of a hero. And of course, it was heavily infused with the goth movement and spirit and visuals, which James Barr, the creator of The Crow, were deeply into that music and culture and style. The movie does have quite a commercial sheen to it. It's directed by Alex Proyas. But that's just it. It did cross over into commercial areas. It touched a lot of young goth people. It touched a lot of women. It touched a lot of kids that saw it, even though it was rated R. And superhero fans and comic book fans. And this was when Crow was an independent creation. And the film rights were being administered by Dennis Kitchen of Kitchen Sink Comics. He had been independent since the 70s. So he and James Barr probably, in a short time, were able to become close to, if not millionaires, and they both really deserve it. I've met James Barr once, and he has signed a Crow poster that he painted, not in the style that he originally drew the character, but as a impressionistic slash realistic painting of Brandon Lee as the Crow in a still from the film. If I ever get the Crow on Blu-ray, I'll probably review it here, but everyone knows the Crow. So anyway, but David J. Schow wrote the film. That's kind of my point. So that's kind of, kudos to him forever. To me, Schow's enthusiasm for the genre, the horror genre, has been really amazing. He's been very influential. I don't always agree with some of his takes on things. I don't think all of his work is great. Getting to this film, Leatherface, I definitely can't say this is great, but he kind of took the same road as L.M. Kit Carson did with the screenplay for Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, which was basically to put a more modern and darker, gorier, and more sickly humorous slant on the proceedings. So, but of course, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, those elements turn off many, many fans of the first one. There's kind of a schism in horror circles. Do you like 1 and 2, albeit for different reasons maybe, or do you love 1 and hate 2? And if you love 2 and hate 1, just get out of my face. So the first one is undeniably a classic. I have reviewed that on this channel. I will probably watch that for Halloween. That's been a tradition for at least 25 unbroken years, to watch it in a couple of days leading up to or on Halloween Eve. To me, it never gets old. It's kind of a urtext of what a horror movie should be, a contemporary, modern kind of horror film. And it's been insanely influential and very copied. The worst copies have really actually been the reboots that came after the movie I'm getting ready to discuss. So let me briefly talk about, because I'm sure all of you hopefully have seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We briefly talk about Part 2. So Part 2 is continuity-wise, because this is a big thing now with the MCU and the multiverse. So these concepts that have been in fantasy literature and comic books for decades, of the crossovers and the reconciliation of continuities, all the way back to really to the early 20th century, with the Sherlockians, and that's nothing new. But as far as modern mainstream cinema fans, they're not as used to chapters or installments of a franchise that really don't contradict each other, that flow smoothly story-wise. I'm not talking about cinematically, but story-wise alone. Oh, I'm having a piece of corn. I think it was a tooth. So, I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 would please today's continuity-obsessed geeks. It certainly pleased yesterday's, especially me, who it's my point of view. It inspired me to write a Wald Newton article called "The Twisted in Texas," and that was an exhaustive and huge work, which never got published online or otherwise. I don't feel like finishing it, but I might finish publish the fragments on my old personal website at some time, if anyone's interested. I know my friend Adam Mudman Jaseski, I can't ever say her name, has access to some of my old files, and actually was a fan of mine back then. I had no idea. We did all this on Yahoo groups. But I did one that tied like the Sawyers from the Chainsaw movies, and the Fireflies from Devil's Rejects, and Jupiter's Family from The Hills Have Eyes, the characters from Home episode of X-Files, and Tom Sawyer himself, both the real Tom Sawyer and conflated with the Tom Sawyer we saw in the very difficult to reconcile League of Extraordinary Gentlemen film, based on Alan Moore's comic book, which again is a total homage, pastiche, crossover, carnival of pop culture and fiction references. He takes it to the limit, and of course, as with Alan Moore, there's a method to his madness. Some of the latter volumes lost me a little, but the Black Dossier is really kind of a brilliant commentary on this whole meta way of looking at things, like that all fiction in one reality, all fiction is real, and that it all exists together in some way. A guy I used to know named Loki Carbus called it the Parliament of Letters. I don't know if he created that or borrowed it, but I'm going to borrow it, but I'll credit him. So anyway, I've done a lot of research on the Chainsaw Massacre movies, but I had never seen but a clip or two of Leatherface. Because when it came out, I had still not embraced gory cinema. I was still a bit squeamish. I saw a few violent movies in the theaters, and I saw horror movies. I loved Night of the Living Dead. But in 1990, that was not where my head was. And then I had a friend that year who saw the film in the theater and told me it was excruciatingly violent and gory, much more than the first two installments, and that it didn't have much continuity with the first two, and that the gory theatrical cut was itself cut for controversial shots that they had to take out for mass release. So almost all that is true. So getting back to part two, my point was is part two, whether you enjoy the tone or any technical aspects of it, it was directed by Tobe Hooper. Kim Henkel probably had a producer credit on it, which means he probably just kind of looked over Tobe Hooper's shoulder once in a while. But he didn't write it. Carson did, and Carson was one of these kind of hotshot, up and coming Hollywood guys in that period, like Joe Esterhaus forgot that other cat who was lauded a lot as being somebody cool to get to write your movie. A later example of that would be Diablo Cody today, who is a woman, by the way. These older ones were guys. But yeah, Ellen Kit Carson had this kind of irreverent voice. Daniel Waters sort of was going in that direction after Heathers. He got the Batman film, and so you started getting some named screenwriters that were writing this more contemporary and, of course, much more racy, boundary-pushing material to varying degrees of success, depending, commercial and artistic success. I usually only care about the artistic success, but I take note of the commercial, and I try to see where they, meet. I talked about this a bit in my last video, on Blue Review video. So, Kit Carson posits a fourth Sawyer brother, and confirms that the family is named Sawyer as a pun on Saw. And we've got Jim Seadow back as the cook, now revealed to be named Drayton Sawyer. And he's cooking chili in Texas. And, I've got the deluxe Blu-ray of this, so I should just keep most of this for that if I ever review it. I might review it this Halloween, who knows. Keep a long story short, though, there was nothing in the film that contradicted the previous film. The fourth brother was in Vietnam during the events of the previous film. They make that clear. He comes back, and he carries around this corpse that he nicknames Nubbins, which they make very clear that is their brother, and it is almost certainly the hitchhiker from the first Texas Chainsaw that dies at the end, thankfully. Grandpa looks the same. It's really, Leatherface acts a little bit differently, but he's still kind of a cross-dresser. He gains a slight element of sympathy because he takes a shine to Stretch, our main character, played brilliantly by Carolyn Williams, who I've met and is a wonderful woman. And, of course, that was the breakout role for Bill Moseley and kind of was the archetypal blueprint for a lot of characters he would later play, especially Otis Driftwood of the Firefly family in the three Firefly films by Rob Zombie. So this was kind of the launch pad. So when I saw Otis Driftwood in House of a Thousand Corpses, I was like, there's Chop Top, the name of his character from the other one. So a lot of researchers, based on clues and things said in the movies and in the screenplays and in interviews, and some creative mythographic connections being made, figured out the real names of the other brothers besides Drayton, and they're all Sawyer. However, this film posits a different outcome. A different outcome than is described in Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, and different names slightly than the ones that have been generally arrived at for the family members in in discussing the first two as a two-part piece of the same story continuity wise. So again, it's important to distinguish. So the thing with remakes, the thing with remakes, reboots, and adaptations is really all the same. Reboots and remakes have, especially reboots, have the luxury of not being beholden to the original material. It can kind of fuck it up however it wants, or improve on it. I don't know, go in a different direction. Such as the Planet of the Apes trilogy and of the Millennium, definitely is not really beholden much to the incredible 5-part film series from the 1970s, which I've also covered exhaustively in a previous Blue Review episode. My favorite science fiction franchise, I think. Neither are they really related to the disastrous Tim Burton remake of Planet of the Apes from, I think, 2000, 2001, which was one of the top 10 worst films that I have ever seen. Generally, this is called Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. So the implication is this is a sequel. And I guess the implication at first glance, my first guess upon encountering it, and then after I'd seen the first two Texas Chainsaw Massacres, this was confirmed for me, was that Leatherface survived the events of Part 2, Chop Top did not, The Cook did not, and there's only Leatherface left. So they make a movie built around Leatherface, and they give it a different tone. They keep kind of the dark humor, the extreme gore. They amp up both of them. They kind of tone down the humor slightly and amp up the gore a lot. And it becomes kind of like an 80s classic slasher movie. I'm not saying the movie itself is classic, but it kind of starts to fit the mold of the classic 80s slasher films, which that's a subject for another day. I used to hate slashers. In the 80s, I hated slashers. Later, I was like, there's some good ones, some not. Now I have a fondness for quite a lot of the 80s slashers. It's kind of something like a subgenre is churned out, much like spaghetti westerns in Italy and giallos in Italy, which giallos, of course, are directly the father or mother, the progenitor of the slasher genre, totally via Mario Bava and his films Blood and Black Lace and Bay of Blood. So I gotta exhale once in a while. So with 3, right away it's very grotesque. It begins with Leatherface making a mask, and it's very detailed and very realistic looking, and he's literally cutting the flesh with these very strong industrial scissors. He's a brilliant seamster, and and he's still kind of wearing the woman's makeup sometimes over his mask. His mask is much grosser and grungier looking, more visceral, less dried out flesh, like in the first two, especially the first. More like something that he's treated to kind of still be flesh-like and not fall apart, though. And if you want to get all the details of him and his masks and their how they're made and their durability and how flimsy they are, there's a scene in Texas Chainsaw Part 2 that's extremely difficult for me anyway to watch, though I have many times, displaying some really grotesque Tom Savini effects. And there's humor in the scene, but it's still pretty nasty the first time you see it. But it kind of here's Leatherface at work making a Leatherface. So this movie just starts out with it, so this is about a Leatherface, kind of in your face, and then they kind of veer away from Leatherface. So you have kind of a couple. These are actors I wasn't that familiar with. I think Kate Hodge was given an introducing credit, as the female lead, the last girl character, which she ends up becoming, much like Sally was in the first and Stretch in the second, and in numerous 80s slasher films. Um, I've forgotten the character's name, but Kate Hodge is pretty good. She's fairly attractive. She's dressed kind of 80s, so she's got big hair and she doesn't have very sexualized clothing, kind of baggy. And she's got a nerdy boyfriend who's a pretty good guy. He has a dark sense of humor. He's a med student. He knows a lot about grotesque happenances and is curious about them. He's not freaked out by them, but she is, and their relationship is gradually disintegrating as they go on this road trip. I forgot their destination, but on their way they pass through Texas, and they're stopped by a bunch of police and medics, EMTs, and people with what do you call them, hazmat suits that are taking apart a crime scene that has been recently unearthed. Literally is being unearthed of up to 50 corpses, some of which have been there for possibly decades, and they've kind of turned into this grotesque, slushy kind of thing, some of them. And so when they're unearthed, they emit this horrible smell and possibly poisonous gas, hence the hazmat suits. And you get the two hazmat suits guys having kind of a sort of humorous but kind of realistic talk about how nasty this is and everything. And of course, you get the cop who's like, pass on, and they want to know what happened, of course. And he's like, don't ask questions, just keep moving and don't stop. So they do take his advice until they get to a gas station. You guessed it, which is where a lot of the trouble happened in the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This gas station is run by this cat who's blind in one eye, bearded, tattooed, and long black hair and a beard, and he's mental. He's out there, and he's an extreme pervert. He's obsessed with fucking women, even though he seems to have no luck doing it. He kind of splatters, very literally, cut out pictures that he is cutting out while we first encounter him on the walls of the bathroom of the gas station. So he's probably had a lot of ecstatic experiences in there. So who wants to go in there? It's kind of like the tense scene. God, I wish I could remember this movie. Powerful movie with Jan Michael Vincent and Brenda Vaccaro when I was a kid. I'll talk about it another time. Jan Michael Vincent also was in Buster and Billy. He was in a few very disturbing films in the 70s. He was kind of this young, studly kid. So he was cast a lot. He was great in the Charles Bronson vehicle, The Mechanic, which I would put in the top 5 Bronson performances. And we'll get back to Bronson soon. Maybe not this episode, but next. Because he veered into the horror and thriller and giallo-esque, slasher-esque area too in the 80s and 90s. So anyway, this guy, peeps on our young lady using the restroom, and he starts giving them all our time. He's saying all kinds of vulgar, nasty things to him. He's completely uncontrolled and unfiltered, just like the hitchhiker. He kind of acts like the hitchhiker character in the first one, played by Ed Neal. And then kind of their savior appears, this character named Tex, played by younger Viggo Mortensen. And he's like a cowboy, and he calls himself Tex. And he's, somewhat handsome, and the chick is a little impressed by him, and he seems like he's going to be their defender against this weirdo who's getting more and more perverted and possibly violent. And so they get the hell out of there, and the gas station owner apparently kills Tex. I say apparently. So I don't know if you can already sense there's twists coming. Who's a member of the family they're going to encounter, who's related to Leatherface, because we've seen this, this bait and switch in the first film, obviously, because at first Sally believes that the cook is her ally, and quite the contrary, and then you find out he's one of them. That he's part of the thing with the hitchhiker, and then you meet Leatherface. So they keep moving, and then all kinds of crazy shit happens. You know, they have a car crash, and they encounter Ken Foree. Ken Foree is great in this movie. This is the younger Ken Foree. I think it's one of the first movies where he's shaving his head bald because he kind of had a receding hairline in Dawn of the Dead. And this is like 12 years on from the filming of Dawn of the Dead. This is around the time he joined the television series General Hospital for a short time. But he looks cool. He's pretty skinny, and he's he gets the best lines. He's like the heroic character. So if you're a big fan of Dawn of the Dead, you see him and you go, okay, yeah, Ken Foree's going to get us out of this fucking mess, and he does do a lot of damage to this insane family, who eventually and predictably, the young lady makes her way to their house in the middle of nowhere, and they were going by these directions by Tex. That's the first seed something's going to go. So of course Tex leads them to the house. He's one of them. He's the handsome one. He has a real name that they call him, but then he's like, call me Tex. And he's like the least degenerate, but still very degenerate. On the way, they meet the brother, another brother. And this character is kind of like equivalent to the Mercury character in Hills Have Eyes, where he's kind of like the Sentinel. His name's Fredo, and he's pretty nasty, but Ken Foree kills him pretty damn fast, and his body falls into the swamp. So Foree is not to be fucked with. I mean, he is afraid, and he is freaked out by this. That's a good, realistic human touch. He's not quite as level-headed and calm all the time like Peter Washington and Dawn, but he does keep his head together. He wants to help. He wants to help both of these people. He doesn't believe at first they're being chased by someone with a chainsaw, because before they crash, they are. Leatherface starts literally chasing their car, and he saws off their trunk. And I really like the way these sequences are shot. They're very dark, and they're very kind of chaotic and moody. And I think if you were a young person at that time getting into this stuff, you'd probably be a little creeped out. I mean, I've seen this kind of stuff a million times, so I wasn't creeped out, but it was familiar terrain, but not in an off-putting way. To me, anyway. I know a lot of people hate this movie, and I expected fully to hate it. So, spoiler warning, I don't love it, but I do like it. But you have to disconnect your brain from it having that continuity, the plus of the continuity and tightness of the first two films. Hooper and Henkel have nothing really to do with the movie except based on characters created by. I don't even think Henkel helped produce it, because all of these horrible remakes and reboots in the millennium, Henkel has self-produced. And I know he's probably in it for the money. And Henkel was a big part of the first one being so great, and him not being a part of the second one, it is arguably a reason why, in a lot of people's eyes, and maybe objectively, the second one cannot stand up to the first in any way. I don't think it can either. But that doesn't mean I don't think it's worthless, and I do enjoy it. I engage with it on its own terms, and I do make a lot of excuses for it. Maybe it sounds like it, because Hooper directed it, and because it is a direct continuation story-wise. Between a continuation and a reboot, I'll always choose a continuation. Like Twin Peaks: The Return. Everybody's like, it's a reboot. It's like, no, it just picks up where the show left off. Texas Chainsaw continuity now is an absolute mess. There have been several direct remakes of the very first film. Then there have been sequels to those remakes. Then there's been one film that was supposedly a direct sequel to the first film, with the actress who is in Mandy, I can't think of her name, the older woman playing Sally, which kind of was the same thing as Jamie Lee Curtis doing the Halloween. That was a direct sequel to the original Halloween, but eschewed the continuity of Halloween 2 onwards. Just picks up with Laurie all these years later. So this movie right away in the beginning, like the other movies, it has the voiceover at the beginning. That's kind of the shtick, and it's effective, and it centers it brings it into the true crime based on true events kind of fallacy that's being presented to us, and it's fun. But in that, according to that, uh, Leatherface was seemingly killed, and his real name was I think E.H. Sawyer, and he. Some people say Leatherface was just. This is according to this crawl in the beginning. In Schow's vision of it, Leatherface could have been a split personality, and that Sawyer uh, died in prison in 1981. He's the last survivor. But the way things are phrased, it's kind of hard. You could take it several ways. You could take it that one of the family survived and died in prison in 1981. At first, I'm inclined to think they mean the cook. But the cook and Leatherface arguably both survived the first film. And Grandpa, I guess he survived. He's already kind of just almost dead. He's kind of almost undead. So that was confusing. And of course, that completely contradicts part two. Also says that Sally Hardesty died at a mental institution in 1977. So we're basically wiping out the first film, and we're directly sequeling the first. We're wiping out the second film. We're going directly back to the first film and talking about the fates of the Sawyers and Sally Hardesty. However, this film presents a different family. Grandpa and Leatherface are the only characters retained. So there's four other siblings. Four others, is that right? Yes. Tex, the gas station guy, Fredo, and this one they call Cindy? No, little girl. But she looks like a Cindy. These four, I believe, are posited as siblings. Well, they're definitely siblings of each other. But they're posited, the implication is they are all Leatherface's siblings. And that Grandpa is indeed their grandpa also. Perhaps they're cousins of Leatherface. Now, if I'd seen this movie earlier, I would have probably tried to reconcile it in my Sawyer and Texas article. And that would have been my conclusion. And I would have basically dismissed the opening of this film as disinformation. Everyone's favorite word nowadays in the political and media sphere. But, it's basically to keep you away from the truth, ostensibly telling the truth, but it's to keep you away from the truth. But it's misused quite a lot by the media and the government right now. But that would have been it's used a lot in Walt Newtonry and creative mythography as a way to explain contradictory accounts and reconcile them. And also to present that layer like it really happened. This is based on something that really happened, so it's distorted, exaggerated, fictionalized, hence the very meta nature of this whole thing, of this way of treating fictional works, which, I'm, of course, very fascinated with. And, essentially the boyfriend dies, Ken Foree seemingly dies, but he wipes out one by one the whole fucking family except for Cindy. Blasts Grandpa, but the concluding implication is that Grandpa was already dead, and they're just keeping him embalmed and talking to him. Whereas in the first, feeding him stuff, but he's not really, his lips aren't really moving and drinking the blood. The first film, he was tenuously alive and did drink the blood they gave him, and that the family felt that was keeping him alive, and they posit that idea in this film too, but he does never move, and when he gets blasted, it does seem like he is just a embalmed corpse, completely, dry and brittle, and his face is blasted off. And that's Ken Foree. Ken Foree gets a machine gun, and he goes to town on these fuckers, and he has a lot of difficulty with them. He gets Fredo and Grandpa away pretty easy, but the others are tricky. There's also a mom character, who I don't know if the mom is the wife or the daughter of Grandpa. I would say the daughter of Grandpa, the mother of this litter of degenerates. And she's dispatched fairly early, and she's an extraordinarily annoying character, and really a kind of an unnecessary character. They kind of use her as exposition to talk about the family and who's who and what's going on, all of which contradicts the stories in the first two films. But this is the new mythology they built around Leatherface. I think with this movie, Leatherface, the character, was cemented as an iconic horror character and was deemed worthy of his own franchise as one of the classic slashers like Jason and Michael and Freddy. And that's interesting because I don't think that, aesthetically that doesn't really jive with the themes or approach of the first film. And even the second film is really more about a degenerate family a la Hills Have Eyes than it is about a lone slasher with his shtick being the chainsaw, just like, Michael Myers has, the knife, and Jason has the hockey mask and the machete, and Freddy's got the claws, so Leatherface has the chainsaw. So, of course, when Todd McFarlane began making his incredible Movie Maniacs action figures around 98, 99, those were the first four characters, among the first four characters that he did. And I don't have Michael Myers. Sorry. No, I don't have Jason. Sorry, guys. I like Friday the 13th series okay, but it's my least favorite of those big franchises. I have a Freddy Krueger figure. It's incredible. I have the Leatherface figure. It's very nice. I have the Michael Myers figure. It's a little stiff. The early ones were a little stiff and not articulated enough. Anyway, sometime I'll show you guys my Movie Maniacs collection, which I'm not selling immediately. There are things I'm not selling. That bookcase of Blu-rays I'm not selling. I have sold some Blu-rays from out of it. And who knows, in 6 months I may go through it again. Find one or two that I'm like, yeah, okay, I can sell this bit. Right now I'm content. I actually plan on, with my new spiffy phone, doing a video soon, giving you a tour of the Covert Blue Library. I might have it doing 2 parts because I talk a lot and there's a lot of movies over there. But those things are a lot of fun and you won't have to see my face. I'll be POV. So here's, I'm getting a lot of notifications from some friends of mine who are having some problems. So if there's any beep interference, I apologize. So let me wrap this up with Leatherface. Leatherface, ultimately it's just kind of fun. There's action, there's gore. It was advertised as the most controversial horror movie ever. What hyperbole. But there were bootlegs of the uncut Leatherface that began to pop up. Oh, yes, and Leatherface does survive the movie. And The Last Girl. And Ken Foree, thank God. I thought they were going to do him wrong like they did in From Beyond. That was very disappointing. But, these bootlegs are claimed to be uncut. So I researched on IMDb, Wikipedia, a few other sites, and those rumors that I would read about in those kind of catalogs like Video Search in Miami about the uncut Jeff Burr Leatherface that led them to try to use the tagline most controversial movie ever. Controversial either because of its content or controversial because its content had to be removed before you see it. Anyway, its content has been restored, I believe, for home video. I think it's on Blu-ray. That I'm not certain, but I would wager. And then it's uncut. It seemed like something Scream Factory, Shout Factory would do. But I'm not sure. I can't recall. I will look that up. But my point being is the uncut version is out there. Tubi is well known for doing underground, disgusting, extreme films that you can't see anywhere else. From all around the world, all different kinds of films, lengths and formats, horror, non-horror, just very disturbing shit. So you would think they would have an uncut Leatherface, but no, their print is the cut Leatherface. And it's one of those edit jobs like we used to see a lot in the 80s and on television, of course, in the 70s and 80s when we'd see those versions of these films, where the edits are really abrupt and obvious. Like, there's a shot coming and then it doesn't appear. Something totally different pops up. Could be just bad editing. It's basically bad censoring. So obvious censoring. So I cannot claim to have seen the uncut Leatherface. I'm not in a huge hurry, but I am curious. Uh, if it's more of the same of what we do see, then yeah, it's definitely nasty and nastier probably than part two. But this kind of stuff is all relative, really. Once you get to that level of dissecting, dismembering, flaying, and making masks and furniture from the human body. The first movie, by comparison, is a model of decorum. It's sanitized. It's just the Disneyized. I'm kidding. It's not, because you do see the offal and the bones and some blood, but the first movie is masterful at suggesting things that you don't actually see, whether that was on purpose or by design. It completely works and functions in the movie to the unity of effect. Yet the movie keeps driving towards to the very bitter end. It gets more and more intense, more and more insane, more and more unhinged as the family becomes more unhinged and as Sally becomes driven completely insane by them. So you really can't top the first Chainsaw Massacre. So the next movie is supposedly a sequel to Texas Chainsaw: The Next Generation, but I have seen it. It's been a while. I thought it was pretty much garbage. It did launch the careers of Renee Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey, who I quite like in the recent years. I may need to watch it again just on that merit, because I'm pretty sure he is Texan. It was weird seeing Viggo Mortensen in this early role. His acting was just serviceable for the movie, but beginning with the reflecting skin, which I believe is an uneven but kind of haunting movie, he started to become a lot more idiosyncratic. And as time went on, even counting the Lord of the Rings stuff, where as he's Aragorn, but in other films, many other films I've seen with him in since then, he is a fucking incredible actor. I think he's one of the finest working in America today. He got a late start in popularity. He's a bit older than probably a lot of people think he is, but in Crimes of the Future, he rules. So anyway, that's another I've reviewed. Check it out. I've decided that instead of going on and on and on for an hour or two, I'm just going to wrap this video up. My next video will be maybe an hour long, and I'll review hopefully 2 movies, maybe 3. But I've got to build up to it. There was a lot to say because this is an installment in a franchise, and I'm obsessed with context, and this is something I'm passionate about, this mythology. So I'm going to let you guys go. Let me know what you thought of Leatherface. If you love it, hate it, saw the uncut version, whatever. I want to thank all my patrons. I want to thank the new subscribers. I've gained 2 or 3 recently, which was nice because I did lose a few after the Charles debacle, and I'm happy to have more people on board. So Cowell just made another cameo, showing his ass, literally, and take care, my friends. Love you guys.